Look at Pete's face right there. He's so into it. He's so into it.
Hawks on 3, 1, 2, 3. Hawks!
Yes, sir.
He's got this battle cry. Hawks! I've settled on my favorite version of Pete Carroll. My favorite thing that he does. It's the stuff that everybody said that's not going to work in the NFL. It's the stuff that happens in the locker room after a game that gives the Seahawks a chance to make the playoffs in a year that nobody expected much from him. It's the really corny stuff. Like, usually what I would think would make me cringe is what I absolutely enjoy the most. It is Danny O'Neill. This is January 11th, 2023, and welcome to the Dang Apostrophe.
I know when you ask me about these injuries and I give you my thoughts, if you really want to figure it out, I think Danny O'Neill has the best translations for me.
That's the guy. Seahawks coach. Preparing for his 10th playoff appearance in 13 seasons. Third different quarterback has taken him to the playoffs, although I feel weird saying that because it kind of puts it as like, oh, he can make it. I mean, Seattle, when they've made the playoffs without Russell Wilson, it has been this just squeak in variety. Getting in at 7-9 by winning a terrible division in 2010. This year, needing help from the Detroit Lions. Salute to the Lions for getting it done. So I don't want to make it seem like all parts are interchangeable because clearly he has had to work magic to get the Seahawks to be average or okay without Russell Wilson, where when they've been dominant, Wilson's been the quarterback, not necessarily the best player on the team, the most important player because of the importance of the position. But I don't want to make it seem like the Seahawks have not missed Russell Wilson. They've missed Russell Wilson. I don't know if they've missed the Russell Wilson that we saw this year, but it's been a significantly different season. And the reason I see this as one of his biggest coaching successes, Pete Carroll, is because of what he's done in spite of really, really meager expectations. I am Danny O'Neill. This is the Dang Apostrophe. Before we get going, a couple pieces of housekeeping. I do have a newsletter that is attached to the podcast. I would encourage you to check it out. I update it at least twice a week, sometimes 3 times. It is kind of turning out to be one of my main sources of income as I become a freelance writer. So if you'd take a look at that, I'd be grateful for that. Also, want to make you aware of another podcast that I'm hosting. It is the Say Who, Say Pod, which is a Washington Huskies podcast, which I host along with Christian Capel of The Athletic. It's going to be our second full year. We've done it. We did it in bits in 2021. And 2022, we were very disciplined throughout the course of the season. And in 2023, we're going to make it a year-long weekly institution. So go ahead and check that out wherever you get podcasts. And if you can rate or review it, that would be exceptionally helpful. As for the Dang Apostrophe, some people want to know, why is it named after a punctuation mark that exists in my last name? And well, I turned to KGB to say that, like the apostrophe in my last name, I continue to
hanging around. Kid's got alligator blood. Can't get rid of him.
I hope not. Not anytime soon, at least. My favorite moment Sunday, I actually saw on Tuesday. All right, here we are. Post-game Sunday. Seahawks have just beaten the Rams in overtime. They don't know if they're in the playoffs yet. They're going to need the Lions to beat the Packers. Spoiler alert. The Lions beat the Packers. We don't know that yet, though. And I've probably watched this half a dozen, maybe 10 times so far. I usually don't like locker room scenes. I feel that they're sanitized and curated. We don't really see something that's interesting unless Antonio Brown's live streaming it on Facebook. But I generally feel like there's this convergence of rituals. It's a little kid's game with a little kid's ritual of like giving out game balls, but it's a coach trying to act super officious, right? And in the NFL, and coaches generally are very respectful of the efforts that their players make. Like they don't treat them like kids. They don't treat most NFL players refer to their coach by his first name. Like that's generally how it works. There's a level of respect there. And so I feel like it's this weird mismatch of childhood ritual with like grown men trying to show each other respect. Pete's are totally different. Like Pete's are just totally different. And I love them. I would think that my reaction to this would be, this is corny. And it's not at all.
I got something for you. I've been waiting all year to say this. Can you win the game in the first quarter? No! Can you win the game in the second quarter? No! Can you win the game in the third quarter? No! If you can't win it in the fourth quarter, can you win it in OT?
My only disappointment is that I can't hear Bruce in the background going, hell no! It's goofy, man. And yet when you watch it, you can tell the guys are into it. It's the sort of stuff that the reason people said Pete's act isn't going to work in the NFL. I remember that very clearly. I remember feeling that I don't think that's going to work with young millionaires. When he got the job, after all the success at USC, there were two questions I had. Okay, in the NFL, you can't recruit yourself to a prohibitive talent advantage. At USC, if it's possible, you can get 5 of the 10 best recruits if you're that good as a recruiter and you make your program that exciting. Like you can recruit you can't do that in the NFL. Like the way to sustain success in the NFL is to draft better than everybody does. And there's a fair amount of evidence that no one really does that. You can be fortunate. You can have things work out. But there's no one who has some sort of magic touch where they consistently just draw superior talent from their drafts. Or you make those guys that you have better than the other ones. And that's a different task than a college football coach has. How much is college football coaches, is half their job recruiting? It might be half. In the NFL, like most of it is about player development and scheme. Getting the guys to run the plays you want, provided those plays work, and getting the guys who run those plays to improve over the course of their employment with you. And then the second question was, are guys going to buy this? I'm kind of surprised that my answer is like, yeah, they do. I think there's a shelf life for it. But, and you look at, here's Tyler Lockett right here in the background. Tyler's as veteran as you get on this team. With Bobby and Russ gone this year. And he's right there. Like he's engaged in it. Like you watch how the players in the background react to this.
Hey, we squeezed every freaking second out of this season. Every second of it, all the way down, killing it 4 so that we kick it and the clock's gone. Beautiful freaking day-to-day work. It was hard. It was hard because it's an NFL game. It's always hard. They get paid too. They play good too. But you hung in there and you kept doing stuff right. And look how much we had to execute down the stretch. I love that the defense gave up 3 points in the second half. I love that.
Shout out to Tariq Woolen swinging the towel over his head like a helicopter.
It's been really 3 great weeks of coming back and getting our together. It's really a great job of getting that done. Regardless of what happens, this team is going places, fellas. You know it. We've been feeling it the whole time. But, fellas, there's so much heart. There's so much love. There's so much caring for one another. This is a real freaking team, fellas. And for the guys that haven't been around a place like this, I'm so happy that you got to feel it because we're just getting freaking warmed up. That's what it is. We're just getting warmed up. And if it's coming off tomorrow, then it's going to be coming the next time around. We're going to get our shit done. So, fantastic job today.
Hey, what a team we got, man. What a brother.
I'll go back to this. That's Geno Smith talking to the team because you'll see Pete's head right at the end, and he's looking straight at Geno to see how Geno handles that, which Pete is very attentive to how his players respond and how the dynamics of his team work and who steps into leadership roles and who exhibits those leadership qualities. But there's also something about the fact that he is that energetic without any sort of sense of, he doesn't apologize for it. He doesn't try to make it seem like, oh, I know I'm a bit goofy. Like, he fully embraces that. Like, this is who he is. And players respond to that. Even though, like, when I look at that, I was like, that's more how a high school or a college coach would interact with his team than how I would expect an NFL coach to interact with it. It is much more about emotional buy-in than it is transactional. And what I would mean by that is the emotional buy-in is sort of the rah-rah enthusiasm of we can do it. We just need to believe. And I believe most NFL teams operate on a more transactional model, which is it's your job. You get paid to perform this job. We are going to put you in the positions that we think make you most capable of excelling at your job. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's a job. And when we do our jobs well, we go home with a victory. And that's what I see in most NFL locker rooms, especially the footage that gets put out by the teams, is this way to go, men. We did a good job. Enjoy this win. You earned it. Pete's is different. Pete's is an emotional buy-in. It is, you feel what this is like. It can always be this way. Like, and I really do think, as weird as it is, like these sort of, it's propaganda, right? Like, it's put out by the team. There's nothing, his swears are edited out. But it's also authentic, and you're seeing how he actually interacts with his team. And I think you're seeing the reason that he has been able to get the team to the playoffs in 2 of the 3 years that Russell Wilson wasn't the quarterback. Like, he does get guys to buy in. And they're not too cool for school or like, oh, I'm above that. Like, this is, don't talk to me like I'm a kid on scholarship. Like, he does get that buy-in. He does get them to see the team as, once we get it right and once we get it going, we're going to be able to sustain this. And it takes you believing. And you've got to believe. And I believe. And I believe so much that I don't really care if I look corny to people that are on the outside. Like, there's a courage in that. There's a courage in doing that. And I guess I should know because I'm fairly corny. But Pete's got a courage in not caring that he doesn't sound like other coaches. Of not caring that some people think he's a Pollyanna. Too good to be true. And his players do respond to it. And that's what I'm always struck by in those. I'll go back to Bruce Irvin. The time that we heard Bruce Irvin, I'm going to have to go find the audio clip. When Bruce goes, hell no! And there's an emotional connection that Pete has made there. And players are embracing this goofy ritual that you think sounds more something that you would be more likely to hear after a high school game or a college game. Let's go back to the start of Geno's speech here. So Pete's done.
job today.
Hey, what a team we got, man. What a brotherhood. Coach talked about it last night, right? What it means to be a brotherhood and play for your brother, man. And that's what happened today. It took everybody, man. It took everybody. I'm proud to be a part of this team. Hey,
Look at Pete right here. Like, if you look at Pete right there, like, he is watching Geno. And I don't think this is the case where he's an audience member. I think he's looking, how does Geno handle this moment? And how do the guys respond to him? Geno, in my mind, is the best story off of this team this year. And I'm not going to say that no other coach could have brought out what Geno did, because I don't want to diminish. Geno's a talented player. Like, he was talented enough that the New York Jets drafted him in the second round and thought he had a chance to be their future long-term quarterback. He was talented enough that Jerry Reese and Ben McAdoo signed him and then ultimately went to start him over Eli Manning. It didn't work out well for him. But I don't want to be like, oh, Pete Carroll made Geno Smith. Like, it takes the agency away from Geno. Geno had a great year because Geno is a talented and capable football player. I do think Pete put him in the best situation to achieve that success. And I think a huge part of what Pete did was believing in Geno. Of saying from the beginning, I think Geno's out in front. We're prepared and we're comfortable with Geno being our starter. And everybody snickers, including me, because I did not think I thought Drew Lock. I didn't think Drew Lock had a good chance of being Seattle's long-term quarterback. I thought he had a much better chance of doing that than Geno Smith. If you were going to start this season with the Hugh Millen pie chart, I would say 85% likelihood that Seattle's 2023 starting quarterback was not on the roster in 2022. Like, that their long-term, the guy they would end up going with wasn't on the team this year. Then it would be similar to 2011 when you had Tavares Jackson and Matt Hassel, or 2011 when you had Tavares Jackson and Charlie Whitehurst after Matt Hasselbeck. That I think most likely it's going to be someone else. And of that 15% chance that it might be one of those guys, it was like 12% chance that Drew Lock would be the long-term starter and like 3% chance Geno Smith would be that Geno Smith would be the opening day starter in 2023. I did not give that much of a chance of occurring at all. At all. I thought he'd be the starter at the beginning of 2022. I thought he would eventually, after a month, maybe a month and a half, Drew Lock would get the opportunity. The reason that Geno did have the success he had, I think was enhanced. I think that Pete Carroll gave him the best chance because of how he buoyed Geno's confidence. And you saw a couple things about it over the course of the season. The game, was it against the Chargers when he wiped off? Like, Geno was upset about a call and Pete like rubbed his chest and it was clear he was giving Geno a cue of like sort of let go of that, focus on the next play. Like, don't get outside yourself. And it worked. They had a huge third down conversion on the next play. Like, you saw Geno release the objection that he had to the call and focus on the next thing. Like, it was this perfect, like, Pete was focused on what he thought his player needed to give him a chance to be successful. And Geno took advantage. Like, Geno embraced it and leaned into it. And I think where you see Pete staring at him, I think he's looking to see, like, okay, how does Geno handle this role? He's in a different spot now. He's our starting quarterback. Geno Smith is the starting quarterback of the Seattle Seahawks. And you can wonder how they're going to re-sign him or how all that's going to shake out. I would be shocked if Geno Smith is not their starter next season. And Pete's looking of like, okay, how do we get more consistency out of him? How do we get him to take the next step? How does he embrace being a leader here?
Let's keep going, baby. Hawks on 3, 1, 2, 3. Hawks!
Yes, sir.
It just cracks me up. Look at Pete's face right there. He's so into it.
Hawks on 3, 1, 2, 3. Hawks!
Yes, sir.
He's got this battle cry. Hawks! Before the season started, I had Mike Sando from The Athletic on for an interview in which we kind of talked about this season and focused on the paths diverging for Russell Wilson and the franchise and what would constitute success for the Seahawks, what was at stake for the Broncos, I think. And I've known Mike since 2005. I started covering the Seahawks for the Seattle Post-Intelligencer that year. Mike was the most experienced beat writer. He worked for the Tacoma News-Tribune. I've always respected Mike's expertise as a journalist. And the things that there are two things specifically that I think Mike does exceptionally well. First, Mike understood how to cover an NFL team online. Like, he was one of the best newspaper reporters at understanding how to do that in an online environment. Most newspaper reporters continued to cover the teams as they had for their newspapers. And in 2005, the internet wasn't new, but most newspapers were not centered on their website, and their coverage of teams was not. And Mike did a lot of things. Mike would post the full audio of a Wednesday Mike Holmgren press conference. After we got back from the press conference, he would go upload it. They had a blog. Like, those were things that were novel. Mike understood and approached covering a team differently in an online era, and he did that before most newspaper reporters did. In fact, I would say he and Mike Reese, over in New England, in Boston, were two of the guys kind of at the cutting edge of that in newspaper reporters who embraced and explored new ways to cover teams in an online news cycle. The other thing that I've liked about Mike, and what I've liked about Mike seeks to understand how the power brokers in the league see the game and the players in it. There are a lot of different ways that journalists try to make their mark. You see insiders, which I would include like Adam Schefter, Ian Rappaport, guys who they're focused on scoops. My value is I get news before anybody else does. And then there are people who focus on relationships and insights from the players. And it's not that Mike doesn't do either of those things. He does and did. But Mike approached trying to understand how the power brokers in the game, and I would say that there's three tiers of that. There's coaches, there are scouts, and then there are the front office executives. And each one of those kind of fills a different role. There's overlap between all of them. But he would seek to understand how they saw the game with the goal of letting his readers in on sort of this is how they're looking at it. And it wasn't saying that this is the right way or this is the ultimate truth, but Mike's really good, and you see it in his coverage. Like, you see that clearly in his coverage now at The Athletic. The quarterback tiers list he does each year is one of the best pieces, like one of the pieces of journalism that I enjoy most, regardless of genre. Like, he tells you how do guys in the league sort of rank these quarterbacks, and they don't rank them 1 to 32. Like, they rank them in levels of what does this guy do? How far can you get with this kind of quarterback? Like, it's fascinating. And he does it in his weekly column. I think it's called The Pick Six on The Athletic. Like, he lets you know how guys in the league see the sort of issues and questions. And I think we shared the same sort of view on Russ when I talked to Mike, which was Denver's probably going to be better because Russ is a better quarterback than they've had. Russ is going to have more say and has been empowered, and he's linked with a first-time head coach. Seattle is going to take a short-term step backward. Doesn't mean it was the wrong choice. Seattle was dealing with a quarterback who was unhappy in his current situation regardless of whether he was right to be unhappy or not. Like, that was a reality. You had a quarterback who wasn't enthused about the way things were going with the team. You also had a question of, okay, if he's not going to resign, what are we going to do here? And Seattle, I think both of us felt like this isn't necessarily the best decision for Seattle's prospects, but they're also up against a tough situation. And there was also the cliff of, okay, if he had a bad year, if Russ had a bad year this year, or if he truly is declining as a player, like, we might be in a situation where right now is the most we can get for him if we're going to get out. If he's not going to be our long-term quarterback, right now we better get what we can, because the return might be significantly less 12 months from now. We know now that that's not how the situation and the season turned out for either team. But what was most interesting in going back and listening to what Mike and I talked about and what Mike explained was, I asked him, what are you looking for the Seahawks this season? What would be a sign that this Seahawks team is on the right track? And Mike pointed to two things. Like, there were two things that he wanted to see.
Look good again. So I think that I would want to see two things from them. One, I kind of believe that the great coach rarely has a terrible year. Even Pete in his first couple of years was 7-9. I think he's a great coach. So I want to see that. Like, he has to save them from being really bad. And then...
That's fascinating, isn't it? He's got to save them from being really bad. It's a really different way than most fans and people look at a team, especially in the contemporary context, which is sort of the worst thing you want to be is average, right? Like, there's a school of thought. I'm not going to say it's totally wrong. There's a school of thought, though, I don't agree with it, which is either be good or be bad. Either be good and have a chance to not just make the playoffs, but do some damage there, or be bad. Because if you're bad, you get good draft picks. And that the worst spot to be is sort of stuck in the middle, where you're not really good enough to matter, but you're not bad enough to get the picks that you need to get good, right? Like, you're like meh. Mid is the phrase the kids use. Very mid. It's like, it's not great, it's not awful, and that's a bad place to be, high centered in the middle. I understand that. I don't necessarily agree with it. But hearing Mike say it, like, I was like, that is a way of looking at a team and a coach. I would say Belichick's a great example of a guy who, like, they don't have bad years. I mean, I guess they had a bad year with Cam Newton when Newton just clearly was broken. But even without Brady, they didn't make the playoffs the year Brady suffered a knee injury in the first game. Matt Castle was the starter. I think they won 11 games. I know they won at least 10. I think they won 11 games and didn't make the playoffs. I think they went 11-5 and didn't make the playoffs in that year. And they didn't make the playoffs this year with Mac Jones. They got in last year but weren't very good. But that idea of, hey, even when you don't have sort of the killer team, even when you don't have a championship caliber team, you're not awful. Seattle wasn't awful in 2010. They were rebuilding, and they had some real depth issues. They weren't awful. They're 7-9. They got into the playoffs and had that ridiculous win over the Saints. 2011, they've got Tavares Jackson as their starter. He gets hurt. Charlie Whitehurst comes in, was god-awful. Tavares Jackson comes back. He's playing limited. Like, they weren't bad. They were 7-9. They lost their final two games, and that included a really close game against a 49ers team that was really good. Sort of the Seahawks. I think that you saw the seeds of them turning the corner. Last year, they had a horrible middle of the season. Awful. The quarterback was hurt. They ended up coming back and winning their last couple games. Like, they won 7 games. And then this year, Seattle's flawed. I don't expect them to win against the 49ers. I give them a better shot than most people do. I think their run defense is going to be better than it was in that game against the 49ers on Thursday night. And I think you've got a situation with San Francisco having a rookie quarterback where I could see this game going differently. I don't expect it to. But I could see a scenario where Seattle gets up and gets some energy and all of a sudden is playing better. And I think they've got a better shot to win this game than they had to beat the Saints in the 2010 playoffs. Like, I definitely believe that. Did Pete save them from being bad? Yeah, I kind of think he did. I kind of think he did. You got Geno Smith, who hasn't started a game since 2017. Is that right? Is that when he started the game for the Giants? 2015? No, it's 2017 because it was his first year with the Giants. And he ends up in the Pro Bowl. Who are the really good players? I'd say Tariq Woolen is really good. I think Jordan Brooks was having a really good year before he got injured. I think Darrell Taylor has been one of the most inconsistent players on the team. I'm encouraged by how he ended the year, but his beginning, he was completely out of sorts to the point where Seattle had to find somebody to take some snaps because they couldn't count on him. I think they've got two really good offensive tackles. I think they've got two great wide receivers. I really liked how they played with three tight ends this year. But if I was going to say, like, who are their great players, I think they've got three and possibly four sort of guys who are going to be leaders, like anchors going forward from this rookie class. The two tackles, Abe Lucas, Charles Cross, and Tariq Woolen for sure. I think Kobe Bryant's pretty good. And Ken Walker's a great running back. Like, I like watching him play. I will argue all day about the sort of, not the importance of that position, but the fragility of that position. But they're great players. Like, I think this team really overachieved. And at some point, it stops being an accident that it's happening under the coach with the corny post-game rituals. It was interesting. Let's let Mike finish the point here. He gave us the first one is that great coaches rarely have a bad season. What's the second thing you would want to see?
I want to see the young guys play. Now, it's a huge bonus cherry on top to me if Drew Lock looks good at some point during the year. You know, I'm not one of the Lock believers. I certainly understand what they're talking about because he does have really good talent, but he just seems like the type of guy at the worst time who just totally ruins the game, you know, and he has to prove his way out of that and wasn't able to in preseason. If they were to get a quarterback answer out of this season, to me, that's winning the lottery because I think they bought a lottery ticket in Drew Lock. I don't think.
Funny. Sando was pretty much the same as I was, which was like, okay, Geno Smith's there, but he's not really the long-term consideration. And then it's Drew Lock, and I completely agreed with his assessment. If Drew Lock ends up playing significant snaps for Pete Carroll, Drew Lock is the kind of quarterback that's going to drive Pete nuts. Absolutely drive him crazy, I think, because he's the guy that's going to be prone to hucking the ball downfield. That's Pete's number one big pet peeve is that the arm punt. He hates it. And Geno's committed too many turnovers. Like, we should be very clear about that. I think he's had a turnover in 16 of the 17 games. Like, that's going to need to improve stepping forward. But it's kind of like what Sando said is just a little flipped. Like, it's not Drew Lock that turned out that way. It's Geno Smith.
He's a investment. You know what I mean? I don't think he's a blue chip stock. I think he's a little bit of a lottery ticket, and I don't mean like it's Powerball odds, you know, but you're, you know, they're trying to win a few $100 on a lottery ticket, and that's hard to do.
You know what? Seattle won a few $100s on a lottery ticket with Geno Smith. And it's not that it was an unknown quantity because he'd been on the team. Seattle won. It's not a Powerball jackpot. They didn't get Kurt Warner MVP from the Arena League sort of project heap. But I think they might have gotten somebody who's as good as Kirk Cousins. There is value in an average NFL starting quarterback. And I would say right now you feel I don't feel it's unreasonable to say like I think Geno Smith is an average NFL starting quarterback. Like, you got to the playoffs with Geno Smith. Like that's an average NFL starting quarterback can get you to the playoffs. Like that, if everything goes right, you might go a little further. I'm not sure he's going to pilot you through multiple playoff victories. And I'm not sure if you get into a situation where you're like, okay, nothing else is going right and we need you to win this game, if that's going to happen. Those are the Powerball odds, right? I won a couple $100 on a lottery ticket. It feels good. Feels nice to give a Pete Carroll. Whoo! Is that how Pete shouts? I don't know if that's how Pete shouts. That's going to do it for this episode of the Dang Apostrophe. I am Danny O'Neill. I encourage you to check out my writings on Substack. If you're a Husky fan, please tune in to the Say Who, Say Pod. Christian and I will be recording tomorrow morning, Thursday, January 12th. We'll have updates about the Sam Heward decision to enter the transfer portal. And we got the Seahawks. The Seahawks playing on Saturday. I'll also be, I think I'm serving as, I don't know if it's, I'm working with Mitch on Sunday for Mitch Unfiltered. So that he's letting me out from the Patrons Corral. And I will be doing the regular show, which will be posted early next week, Mitch Unfiltered. Talk to you soon.
Then Marshawn Lynch, shut up, Danny.